I am so thankful you guys are here. Thank you, first and foremost, for being here. This next speaker, I am so excited to actually introduce. He is awesome and a much-needed voice in today's culture. He is not afraid to take on some heavy-hitting issues. And the panel that he's actually going to be doing is how all policy is family policy. We hear a lot about putting the family first and what that looks like, and Delano Squires is his name, and he is a research fellow with the Heritage Foundation and also a contributor to The Blaze. He is also married with 4 children, which I know firsthand how difficult it is to be in this realm with children, and I commend him a great deal. If you get a chance to listen to some of the things that he has put out there, it's awesome stuff, and I'm excited for you guys to hear him tonight, and we are just blessed to have him. So please give him a warm welcome, and I can't wait to hear what he's got to say.
Thank you for that introduction, Lauren. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in the great state of Georgia. My sister and brother-in-law and my young nephew are Atlanta residents, so hopefully at some point I'll get to see them. So it's good to be here with you. So I'm going to speak briefly about the fact that all policy is family policy. The late journalist Andrew Breitbart coined the phrase, politics is downstream from culture. Now, the Breitbart doctrine, as it's come to be known, reminds conservatives that changes to our political system must be preceded by changes in our culture. It's important to keep that in mind because while all policy is family policy, the state of our families will ultimately dictate the shape of our culture. And it's hard to craft pro-family policy in an anti-family culture. And if you're not convinced about the interconnectedness between family and policy, just look to the last election. The issue of inflation didn't resonate with voters because of abstract arguments about monetary policy. President Trump connected with voters on economic issues because mothers felt the pinch in their pocketbooks every time they bought groceries or had to pump gas. Managing a budget for a family of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 becomes more difficult when policy decisions lead to higher prices and financial stress. Now, education is another area that directly impacts the family. For decades, parents of every race, ethnicity, and religion thought schools should teach the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Some may have had complaints about the quality of their child's school, but everyone agreed on the purpose. But today, the schoolhouse has been transformed into a political training ground centered on equity. I saw a bus ad last year for a DC public school that promoted its focus on quote-unquote social justice. I checked the school's online profile, and 0% of students were proficient in math or English language arts. These schools are creating future activists who will need other people to write their signs and count their donations. At 13 Baltimore City high schools, not a single student tested proficient on a 2023 state math exam. The creators of one curriculum funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation claimed that, quote, white supremacy culture, unquote, shows up in the classroom when students are required to show their work and the focus is on getting the right answer. I wish someone would have told me that before I wasted 4 years studying computer engineering in college. Other districts are teaching students that all white people play a part in perpetuating systemic racism. But race essentialism and obsession are not the only part of the left's indoctrination strategy. The other is the introduction of sexual orientation and gender identity into the classroom. Now, we all remember the controversy surrounding the Florida's parental rights law, which was deceptively dubbed by the media, the Don't Say Gay bill. The law supporters didn't want young children exposed to content that discusses sexuality or gender identity from, I believe it was from kindergarten through 3rd grade. Now, its opponents responded by saying gay in every public venue, including the Oscars, and demanding the right to talk to children about the gender unicorn and personal pronouns. Before he became a pariah in his own party, New York City Mayor Eric Adams was a loyal soldier in the Progressive Pride Army. Here's an official statement from him in 2022 on the Drag Queen Story Hour program, and I quote, "At a time when our LGBTQ plus communities are under increased attack across the country, we must use our education system to educate. The goal is not only for our children to be academically smart, but also emotionally intelligent. Drag storytellers and the libraries and schools that support them are advancing a love of diversity, personal expression, and literacy that is core to what our city embraces," end quote. Now, Adams oversees the largest public school district in the country. There are over 1.1 million students in New York City. I was one of them. And I can assure you that I did not suffer academically because I graduated before the city started to use drag queens as literacy coaches. But of all the policy issues that animated voters in 2024, immigration was at the top of the list. As you all know, President Trump signed the Laken-Riley Act yesterday, named after the Georgia woman who was killed by a Venezuelan man who entered the country illegally through the southern border. He was arrested multiple times in different jurisdictions before killing the 22-year-old nursing student. The new law will allow federal immigration enforcement officials to detain and deport illegal aliens charged with minor theft or shoplifting, assault on a law enforcement officer, or other crimes related or that result in death or bodily injury of another person. These are the types of offenses that can get dangerous people off the streets and keep families safe. But I'd suggest that even the way we think about the issue of immigration can be brought back to family terms. So for instance, my wife and I adopted her maternal cousin last year. So as Lauren mentioned, I have 4 children, 9, 6, 5, and 4. So when we told our other 3 kids back in 2022 that they were going to get a new sister, they were obviously, quite excited. But adoption requires a family to create a new equilibrium because every new addition to the family, whether born or adopted, requires time and attention. It requires the existing members to find the right fit. It can be a trying process, but I would certainly say that it's well worth it. But imagine for a minute how my household would change if we told our kids that we plan to adopt a new child every week of the year. If we said that they will have to share their room, toys, food, and clothes with an additional 50 children, while mom and I enjoy the comforts of our large spacious room and eat steak and lobster every night for dinner. Now, my negligence as a father and refusal to prioritize my family would not only sour my children on adoption as a picture of God's redemption and love, it would also make them dislike the new kids and ultimately resent their parents. This is exactly the type of mismanagement that makes people open to radical change. And if there's one area that needs its own revolution, it is the American family itself. About 40% of all children today are born to unmarried parents. Nearly 1/4 live with a single parent, the highest rate in the world. Now, while the 70% non-marital birth rate among Black women receives a disproportionate amount of attention, close to 30% of white children and over half of Hispanic children are born out of wedlock. Asian Americans are the only ethnicity in this country whose non-marital birth rate falls below what I call the Moynihan threshold, right, which was 25% non-marital birth rate for African Americans back in 1965. Now, this is important because father absence is associated with higher rates of poverty, teen pregnancy, youth crime, and substance abuse. Conversely, children who grow up with both parents are more likely to attend college and less likely to live in poverty or go to prison. Dads today spend more time with their children than fathers did in the 1960s. For many men, bathing their children and reading to them at night is as important to them as teaching them how to fish or throw a spiral. Those who have used law and culture to undermine the role of fathers are wrong. Fathers matter, regardless of their color, religion, socioeconomic status, or political views. Now, some people would point to the rise in cohabitation of unmarried couples who have children together and suggest that couples today are providing loving and stable homes in the same ways that they did in decades past. In 1968, cohabitation was virtually non existent, but the trend has changed quite a bit since then. In 1997, 20% of unmarried parents living with a child were cohabiting. By 2017, it was 35%. Unfortunately, studies show that 2/3 of cohabiting couples break up before their child turns 12, compared to only 25% of married couples. Now, a frequently cited study from the CDC on father involvement found that only 8% of fathers who lived apart from their young children ate with them every day, while 43% said they didn't eat with their kids at all. By contrast, 72% of dads who lived with their children ate meals with their children every single day. Now, combining the research on cohabitation and fathers proves it is virtually impossible to strengthen families without talking about marriage. Our families are more fractured than ever, and there are forces in our culture that want to exploit that fragility. Think about how Democrats tried to sow division in the home during the last election by trying to convince married women to reject their husbands in favor of a progressive sisterhood that won't even define woman in public. And despite being hectored by campaign surrogates and targeted in Your Vote, Your Choice political ad narrated by Julia Roberts, 51% of married women still voted for President Trump. Now, the results are even more stark when you analyze them by race and education. According to exit polls, 66% of unmarried white women with a college degree voted for Kamala Harris, while 69% of white women with no college degree voted for Donald Trump. The institution of marriage is inherently conservative. There's no human relationship that exemplifies unity and stability more so than one man and one woman committing to each other for one lifetime. Now, that feels foreign in a culture that thinks any momentary decline in happiness is a reason for divorce. But couples who pledge to stay together till death do us part know they will encounter challenges along the way. Marriage considers couples to prioritize someone other than themselves on a daily basis. So, for instance, a single woman might see efforts to diversify a traditionally male occupation as a sign of progress. But when the man losing his job is your husband, suddenly girl power doesn't sound nearly as appealing. This instinct towards self-preservation intensifies when children are added to the mix. Married mothers have every reason to prioritize the well-being of their children over saving the world. This is why every ounce of our political, social, cultural, and financial capital should be focused on creating a new marriage culture and restoring the American family. So the question is, how do we get there? One step is by making the case to this generation and future generations that marriage is valuable, desirable, accessible, and indispensable for the purpose of family formation. Put simply, we need to embark on a marriage before carriage campaign that is infused in every part of our culture. The way I put it is this: if we want to strengthen the family and fortify the home, we need to get 4 houses in order. So I'm going to speak to you for the next few minutes about these 4 houses: the church house, the schoolhouse, the art house, and the state house, that represent 4 distinct yet interrelated aspects of our culture, namely religion, education, media, and government. John Adams is famous for saying that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, and that it is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Unfortunately, 30% of Americans are now religiously unaffiliated. Religion provides a moral foundation, a lens through which people view the world, and boundaries that govern our behavior. A decline in the importance of religion is one reason marriage is seen as a temporary contract as opposed to a lifelong covenant. An irreligious culture that prioritizes convenience over duty produces people who are ready to divorce the moment they think, this relationship isn't serving me anymore. But Americans need churches and pastors who are biblically grounded and culturally aware. I'm talking about men who will play a critical role in discipling their members and the broader culture about who created the world, why it works the way it does, and how it holds together. Colossians 1:15 says, He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Genesis 1:27 says, So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Despite what the culture teaches, men and women are not the same. Now, we're equal in dignity and worth, but different in form and function. Androgyny is not equality. You can no more change a man into a woman than you can change a cubic zirconia into a diamond. The reason is simple, because the differences we're talking about are ones of composition, not cosmetics. I start here because if you lose touch with reality on this issue, there isn't anything that a person can't get you to say or believe. Now, when it comes to marriage, again, I look to our designer. Genesis 2:24 says, Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Marriage is between one man and one woman for one lifetime, committed to one another and all the children that come from their union. And again, central to that definition is the protection and well-being of our children. So when the culture talks about family, it often frames the conversation about what rights adults have. So they'll say, well, I have a right to have a child, even though they adopt a lifestyle that makes procreation impossible. But the truth is that children are the rights holder in a family. And every child has a right to the love and support of the man and woman who created him or her. I like to say it this way: children have a right to the protection, affection, and direction of their mother and father, and that right is best exercised in a loving, low-conflict home. Every child that has that has the ultimate privilege, regardless of their skin color or socioeconomic status. And when it comes to children, again, we take our views on the value of a child's life from the Word. Psalms 139:13-14 says, For you formed my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and I know this very well. Now, these are the foundational issues that we must get right if we want to preserve a society worth passing on to our posterity. Now, another way to cultivate a pro-marriage society is to introduce K through 12 students to the success sequence. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar, the success sequence refers to research that finds that 97% of millennials born between 1980 and 1984 who finish school, get a job, get married, and then have children, in that order, have a single-digit poverty rate by the time they reach their mid-30s. Now, those steps are tangible, achievable, and measurable. And they can also be introduced to young people long before they have the idea to start a family. So this success sequence is more important now than ever because the left is open, obviously, about its desire to use the classroom for the type of political indoctrination that makes creating a marriage culture extremely difficult. This is why education choice, again, to the last panel, specifically through education savings accounts, is so important. Choice gives parents the ability to find schools that have high standards and align with their values. Home education is another key component of this. My wife and I homeschool, and since doing so, we've begun to see the home, I think, in its original purpose, as a hub of productive economic, spiritual, social, and educational activity. Let's move to the art house. Now, television, film, social media, digital media, and advertising are all important tools for cultivation. We need more positive images of intact American families with fathers who love and lead their families, wives who respect and support their husbands, and children who honor their parents. Now, I understand those types of shows are unlikely to spring up when what we've been planting for decades are bumbling, incompetent dads, disrespectful children, and reality television that showcases drama between wine moms. Now, that said, conservatives need to continue engaging online and through new social media platforms, especially if we want to reach the next generation who are being taught by both the anti-family feminist left as well as the anti-marriage red pill right. The latter is fueled by men who tell other men that they should rethink their approach to marriage, children, and family in a society where women have more economic, political, legal, and cultural power than ever before. But what young men need to know is that marriage and children give them something both to live and to die for. They should not fear forming a family. They should embrace marriage as a man's natural habitat and see the important role that it plays in establishing the social infrastructure for multi-generational success. And yes, I did say that marriage is a man's natural habitat. He eats better, he lives longer, right? But media, in this case, is not restricted to movies, TV shows, and podcasts. Any municipal government in the country can choose to take a portion of its human services or child welfare budget and direct it towards pro-marriage public awareness campaigns. They can have simple messages like, give her a ring before she gives you a baby. Or, in this city, we believe marriage comes before carriage. You could do something similar in a doctor's office by showing posters that have mothers and fathers together caring for a baby and plant the seeds of pro-marriage and pro-family culture right in that office. Those are the types of seeds that can yield fruit both for that couple and for other couples that they might know. So that brings us to our final house, the State House. Now, family policies that are solely child-focused are well-intentioned, but have limited effect without a specific connection to marriage. Yes, it is good to focus the energies of a mother and father on the child that they share together. But marriage also accounts for the duties and obligations that a husband and wife have to one another. The pledge of in sickness and in health is not part of any cohabitation agreement or divorce decree that I've ever heard of. Now, there's a common bipartisan belief that the government can't do much to encourage marriage. I beg to differ, and I'm not solely talking about getting rid of marriage penalties in the welfare state. A new era of conservatism with regard to this important institution is going to require some policy innovation. So let me throw out an idea for you. Let's imagine a program. It could be funded by a federal grant or local government or philanthropic dollars that provides marriage and relationship education to unmarried couples. Let's even say unmarried couples with children. Right? This would be a marriage boot camp for cohabiting couples that moves them from cohabitation to holy matrimony. Now, the program can be administered through a local nonprofit or a local church. It would address some obvious topics: communication, intimacy, fidelity, conflict resolution, blended families. Couples who successfully complete the program, which means they are ready to get married when the program is done, would be eligible to have their marriage license fees waived and participate in a communal wedding, right? Could be at the Georgia Dome. They can invite family and friends. They would also be paired with a mentor couple. And let's say we add a monetary incentive, because this is difficult work. Many conservatives talk about the types of policies that take place that are implemented in countries like Hungary, where the government uses financial incentives to try to create a marriage and family culture. So let's say we gave each couple a $5,000 gift on their wedding day, or maybe even a $20,000 loan that turns into a non-repayable grant after 10 years. Now, what if a study done in 15 years found that only 33% of those couples were still married? Unknown caller. Would you consider that a failure? If so, maybe we should reconsider how we define success. So I'll use a sports analogy. And I'm glad I'm in Georgia, because sometimes you speak in places that may only have one professional team or may not have any. So let's consider the center fielder for the Braves. Let's say he hits 350 for the next 15 years. There's a good chance he's going into the Hall of Fame. But if the starting shooting guard for the Hawks shoots 35% from the free throw line, there's a good chance that he's going to the bench. What's my point? My point is that defining success has to be done in the context of the game being played. And marriage cultivation work with low-income couples who don't have a family history of marriage, who live in neighborhoods where none of the couples are married, where no child is being raised by a married mom and dad, is going to look very much different than if you were doing it in a high-income, middle-class, church-going neighborhood, whether in Georgia or any other state. So again, this is why I think conservatives should use our political and cultural capital to reconnect marriage and family. Now, the good thing is that we all know how. And you remember I talked to you about the marriage before carriage revolution. Where did I come up with that? I think you all remember. You remember being a kid on the playground and hearing this little ditty? Chris and Christina sitting in a tree. Kissing. First comes, then comes baby and a baby. Right. But here is how the culture approaches family formation today. Chris and Christina staring at their screens. Texting. First comes sex, then comes baby. Then comes marriage, but that's a big maybe. This way of thinking is becoming increasingly bipartisan, and that needs to change. Put simply, a comprehensive pro-family ethic needs to include ubiquitous marriage before carriage messaging. And the reason is simple. As I said before, there is no greater privilege in America today than being a child who grows up with his or her married biological parents in a loving, low-conflict household. So the fight for the family will not be easy, but the well-being of our children and the future of our nation are worth it. Thank you.
Good job, brother. Yeah, if you sit down. Did I turn the microphone on for you? Here. Awesome. Great job.
Thank you, sir.
I tell you what, I usually listen to a speaker and I think, that person's probably smarter than me. That kind of stinks. I was listening to you and I'm going, oh man, that guy's way smarter than me. But that was great. I really appreciate it. And look, I felt like I was, listening to so much biblical truth that you packed in there. The title of your talk was All Policy is Family Policy. So often as, we go to churches. Now, my pastor's over there. He's awesome. So I'm not insulting my pastor's great. If you want to come to our church, you should talk to my pastor. But a lot of pastors that we engage with, you talk about cultural issues, political issues. They're like, that's politics. But these are family issues that are integral not only to the gospel, but the day-to-day lives. How do we convince pastors and the church to deal with these issues more head-on?
That's a good question, because I think there are two different ways that churches can fail to do this. Some churches will put their politics in front of their faith. So the politics is the horse and the faith is the cart. I think that's the wrong approach. The church I go to, we will address political issues, but as the text leads us. All right. So, my pastor will preach through a particular text. We're in the book of Genesis now. We started in Genesis last year. We took a break. We went Old Testament, New Testament, back in Genesis.
Sounds like my pastor. He's taking forever to get through
Right,
Acts.
right.
I mean, just good grief.
So, so when you do that, you will come upon things, right? So you'll come across Genesis 127 or 224, and that's an opportunity to sort of drill down and reinforce the biblical truth. I say it that way because I think sometimes there's a tendency to allow, as I said, political debates to pull us in one direction or the other. And this is a bipartisan critique. Because in the last 10 years, across the board, from left to right, you will see politicians who sort of give up their position on some of these issues, right? How do you define a marriage? All right, what is a woman? Should we engage in pronoun hospitality or not? That type of thing. Can men get pregnant? Well, it depends. No, it doesn't. But so I think we need pastors who first and foremost understand that what sets the church apart is the good news of Jesus Christ. You can do a food drive, a nonprofit can do a food drive, a local business can do a backpack drive, some other charitable organization can do all types of good work. The church is the only institution that says your greatest need is not another $5 in your pocket. It's to be forgiven, of your sins. So I think keeping the main thing is the most important thing. And then from there, letting the text speak into the culture as opposed to taking the culture and trying to sort of proof text it with the Bible.
So shorthand for folks in this room, don't go to your pastor and say, why didn't you preach about the election, or why didn't you preach about X? But why did you skip over such and such that is relevant to this culture right now, I think is really key. I think in most churches, if you said, hey, who in this room thinks LGBTQ is bad? And most conservative churches, everybody raises their hand. Boys and girls sports is bad, people raise their hand. But if you say, does your marriage look like the joyful, God-created institution that is the most special relationship you're supposed to have with another human being? Does your marriage look like that? When people are honest, their hands don't necessarily go up as rapidly. How do we make marriage, just on a super micro level, person to person, marriage to marriage, how do we make marriage great again in a how we live it out way to make it more attractive to the world than homosexual marriage, which they try to make look great, but this is what God's created and it's for our good. How do we make that look more attractive?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think, and the vice president, was talking about ordered loves, I guess, in some interview recently, and I certainly agree with him in terms of the fact that, I love my wife more than anybody else's wife, right? But I think sometimes there's a tendency for people to want to solve all the problems, the political, cultural problems out in the world while neglecting their own home. And that's a big problem, right? So I think on a micro level, I would love to see more churches, offer couples counseling, do family ministry. There's a nonprofit organization called Communio, which works specifically with churches on this issue, both Catholic and Protestant, right? So they try to they work with churches to either help them refine their marriage ministries or create them, from scratch. So I think part of it is that. I think part of it is being around other couples where husband and wife love one another. I don't know if there's research around this. My gut tells me that there's something about divorce that can be somewhat contagious. So if you are someone and you find that the women or men you hang around are constantly criticizing their spouse, constantly talking about how bad marriage is, there's a good chance that some of that can rub off on you. So I think being around couples who exhibit sort of the godly character of marriage, I think is a good idea. And then I think sort of on a larger scale, again, taking that sort of ministry work even out of the church and into the community. Marriage has changed so much in our country. So in 1980, the median age for first marriage was about 24 for a man and about 22 for a woman. That's right around where my parents were when they got married in 1981. Today it's about 31 for a man and 29 for a woman.
My wife was 25, I was 20.
So,
Just kidding.
but there are increasingly people. So the social scientists will talk about the cornerstone model of marriage. This is where couples tend to get married young. The marriage itself is sort of a foundation for the life that they build together. The capstone version is when couples tend to get married a little older, after they, accomplish a number of personal and professional goals. So you finish college, finish grad school, you get into upper management, you make partner, you buy 2 houses and a timeshare, and then at the ripe old age of 37, you said, I'm ready to settle down. If we continue on our current trajectory, we're going to have to reckon with the tombstone model of marriage, where people are on the back half of their life, right? The George Clooney model, right? Where you say, well, I've got a little salt and pepper, I have some years under me. Now I'm ready to find a 25-year-old. I'm 55, she's 25, good, it's a good mix. And I don't think people consider what goes into that. Because if I get married let's say I got married at 40 for the first time, and I have my first child at 45, and my son, my first child, follows my course, married at 40, first child at 45. I become a first-time grandfather at 90 years old, about 15 years longer than the average lifespan for a male. So am I going to be able to teach? First of all, am I going to be around? Question number one. Question number two, am I going to be able to teach him to fish or to throw a spiral or how to make the perfect burger? All right, so it's not just the sequence of marriage, it's also the timing. And if there's a way for us, particularly believers in our own homes, who ideally have our children looking at our relationships as a model, to bend that curve back ever so slightly, I think that'll be a good thing.
So you were once we decided we were doing this conference again, you were the very first person I'm like, I want him speaking at my conference. In fact, I hunted you down at an event this summer. I'm like, you were coming to my conference, so we made sure that happened because of this important issue. The greatest blessing in my life, and as much as I abuse the fact that I get a microphone and get to tell jokes at her expense, the greatest blessing in my life is Spencer, my wife. And the way that you speak about this issue, I think, is so important. And one of the things, I said at the beginning, we're not going to spend as much time talking about the Democrats because we don't control them. We control us and how we glorify Jesus. So hold up the mirror for a second. I love so much of what Donald Trump is doing, and I'm so grateful that he's the president of the United States instead of Joe Biden. But when they celebrated Obergefell a couple years ago, they did so at Mar-a-Lago, and Donald Trump said he's been the best president for gay America that we've ever had. How do we shift the paradigm among the conservative movement back to a place where we recognize the centrality of male-female marriage? How do we shift that window back to a place that's righteous?
I'm not sure that we can in the short term. If I can be quite frank, coming out of last year's Republican National Convention, New York Times ran a story about how some policy issues, particularly around the definition of marriage and abortion, were taken out of the platform. Now I understand politics, and sometimes you turn down the volume on a certain channel because you know that voters don't necessarily want to listen to it. But we have to be honest about what the Republican Party will look like in the next few years. And I'm not putting this solely on President Trump.
No.
One of the things I respect about him is that he is who he is.
Mm-hmm.
He spent his entire life as probably a moderate New York City Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he's the standard bearer for the Republican Party now, to me, is almost in many respects a judgment against the gatekeepers of the party for generations. But I'm also aware that the Republican Party, sort of imprinted with the imago MAGA, as I call it, right, reshaped in the image of its standard bearer, has become and will continue to look very different than sort of the party that many people in this room might envision. It probably will be far more open to same-sex marriage. to men who think that they're women, right? I think what you'll see is an attempt to pick off certain issues, low-hanging fruit. I worked 15 years in local government, and I know the preferred fruit of every government administrator is low-hanging fruit. So whatever they can get, that's low. So low-hanging fruit is no boys and girls sports, no men in women's restrooms, which is good. Those are policy wins. But if all of the ideological infrastructure remains, that means that you will send your kid to school. Tom won't be able to identify as Tina and play on the girls' field hockey team, but your children will still have to refer to him as a she when they're in the classroom. So those two things are not the same. I think how we get back to a place of sanity is for believers to live the things that we believe and constantly put pressure on the people we elect to uphold the values that they say they represent. And that can be difficult because on one hand, we want to cheer on the people that we vote for, but if we're not willing to hold them accountable, then eventually we will get to a point where we'll look back in 4, 8, 12 years and say, whoa, we've moved really far from where we started. And my fear is that we don't get to that point when it comes to the conservative movement.
Awesome. Well, now everybody knows why you were my #1 draft pick. So thanks for being here. Y'all give him a round of applause. Thanks, brother.